The steel needle glinted under the harsh prison lights as Warden Morales gave the final nod. Nathan Blackwood lay strapped to the execution gurney, his weathered face calm despite the circumstances. The clock on the sterile white wall read 11:58 p.m., just 2 minutes until midnight, when the lethal injection would begin its irreversible course through his veins. For 8 years, he had maintained his innocence in the face of overwhelming evidence, his only request being to see his loyal German shepherd, Aspen, one final time before death. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The execution chamber of Lakeside Maximum Security Prison maintained a temperature precisely 10 degrees colder than the rest of the facility. Whether by design or coincidence, the chill seemed appropriate for a room where lives were methodically ended under the watchful eyes of the state. Nathan Blackwood felt the cold through the thin fabric of his prison-issued clothes. At 42, he appeared much older. 8 years of confinement had etched deep lines into his once handsome face, turned his dark hair silver at the temples, and permanently stooped his once proud shoulders. Only his eyes remained unchanged, still the same clear blue that had once prompted his former colleagues to joke that he could see through walls. "Any final words, Mr. Blackwood?" Warden Morales asked, his voice neither compassionate nor cruel, simply performing the final duty in a carefully choreographed protocol. Nathan's gaze drifted to the observation window, where witnesses sat in silent rows, representatives from the victim's family, state officials, and a handful of journalists who would transform his death into tomorrow's headline. He saw no friendly faces among them, no one who believed his persistent claims of innocence. "I just wish Aspen knew I didn't do it," he said softly, his voice rough from disuse. Dr. Patel, the prison physician, positioned the IV line at the injection port, expression hidden behind a surgical mask. The warden checked his watch and gave a slight nod. In 30 seconds, the first of 3 drugs would begin flowing, a sedative to render him unconscious, followed by a paralytic to stop his breathing, and finally potassium chloride to stop his heart. Nathan closed his eyes, conjuring the image of Aspen, his German shepherd with the unusual silver coat and intelligent amber eyes. He visualized the dog's joyful bounds across the local park where they had spent countless evenings before his arrest. The way Aspen would always circle back to check on him, tongue lolling in what looked remarkably like a smile. The memory brought unexpected peace. If his final moments were to be spent remembering anything, he was grateful it could be Aspen, the only living creature who had never doubted him, never judged him, never believed for a moment that he was capable of murder. The second hand on the wall clock completed its final arc toward midnight. Dr. Patel reached for the first syringe, positioning it at the injection port. Then the phone rang. The harsh electronic tone cut through the silence with such suddenness that Dr. Patel's hand jerked away from the IV line. Warden Morales held up his palm in the universal signal to halt, his other hand already reaching for the wall-mounted phone. "Morales," he answered, his tone revealing nothing of the interruption's unusual timing. The witnesses behind the glass leaned forward collectively, their expressions ranging from confusion to anticipation. Even the guard, stationed by the door, straightened, his practiced impassivity briefly broken by curiosity. Nathan kept his eyes closed, unwilling to allow hope to breach the walls of acceptance he had painfully constructed over the past 8 years. False hopes had broken him more thoroughly than the conviction itself. He had learned to expect nothing. "I understand," the warden said into the receiver, his voice giving away nothing. "Yes, sir, immediately." The room held its collective breath as Warden Morales replaced the receiver and turned to face the execution team. His expression remained professionally neutral, but something in his posture had shifted. The execution of Nathan Blackwood is stayed by order of Governor Harrington, effective immediately, he announced, his voice crisp with authority. Remove the IV line and return the prisoner to the holding cell until further notice. A murmur rippled through the observation room, quickly silenced by security personnel. Dr. Patel stood frozen, the syringe still in his gloved hand, his eyes seeking confirmation from the warden. "Sir?" he questioned. "The governor has ordered a stay based on new evidence submitted to his office within the last hour," Morales elaborated, though his tone suggested he knew little more than what he was sharing. "All execution procedures are to cease immediately." Only then did Nathan open his eyes, the sudden reprieve too surreal to process. The straps restraining his arms and legs were being unbuckled by guards who carefully avoided his gaze, as though eye contact might force them to acknowledge the significance of what had nearly happened, or rather, what had nearly happened to an innocent man. As they helped him sit up, the cool air of the execution chamber raised goosebumps on his arms. His mind struggled to shift from acceptance of death to this unexpected continuation of life. He had spent the past week methodically saying goodbye to existence, surrendering attachment to everything except his final memories. Returning now to uncertainty felt almost like violence. "What evidence?" Nathan asked, his voice stronger now, edged with an urgency that had been absent minutes before. "What's happened?" Warden Morales shook his head slightly. "I don't have those details. Blackwood, I was only informed that new evidence has been submitted that warrants review before your sentence can be carried out." Nathan swung his legs over the side of the gurney, his balance unsteady as blood rushed back into his extremities. A guard moved to support him, the same guard who would have watched impassively as lethal chemicals stopped his heart just minutes earlier. The absurdity of this juxtaposition wasn't lost on Nathan. "Does this have something to do with Aspen?" he asked, remembering his final request that had been denied earlier that day. The prison administration had deemed bringing an animal into the facility on execution day procedurally inconsistent with security protocols. "I don't know," Morales replied, his professional detachment showing its first crack as confusion, and filtered through. The call mentioned evidence delivered by a Detective Alexandra Chen from Capital City Police Department. That's all I know. Alexandra Chen. The name struck Nathan like physical blow. Detective Chen had been a junior officer during his original investigation, working under Detective James Sullivan, the man who had built the case against him. Nathan remembered her as serious and methodical, taking meticulous notes while Sullivan conducted the interrogations. She had never spoken directly to him, never revealed whether she believed the evidence her superior presented so convincingly to the jury. As the guards escorted him from the execution chamber, Nathan felt the stares of the witnesses following him. The family members of Catherine Wells, the woman he had allegedly murdered, watched with expressions ranging from anger to disbelief. The scheduled closure of their 8-year nightmare had been abruptly postponed, reopening wounds they had, prepared to finally begin healing. The holding cell felt different upon his return, the same concrete walls and metal fixtures, but somehow transformed by his unexpected survival. The thin mattress he had carefully made that morning, smoothing, the blanket in a final act of dignity, now seemed to welcome him back to the land of the living. Guard Rodriguez, who had been kind to Nathan during his final days, appeared at the cell door with a plastic cup of water. "Thought you might need this," he said, passing it through the meal slot. "That was about as close as it gets." Nathan accepted the water gratefully, suddenly aware of how dry his mouth had become. "Do you know anything about what's happening?" he asked, after taking a long drink. Rodriguez shook his head. "Above my pay grade, man. But I overheard the warden on the phone after they brought you back." Sounds like someone showed up at the governor's mansion about an hour ago with evidence they couldn't ignore. Strong enough for a midnight stay. "Someone with a dog?" Nathan asked, hope creeping into his voice despite his efforts to contain it. The guard's expression registered surprise. "Yeah, actually. How do you know? There was something about a woman detective and a German shepherd showing up with some kind of evidence. That's your dog, right? The one you wanted to see?" Nathan nodded, his throat suddenly tight with emotion. "Aspen," he confirmed. "But I don't understand. How would Aspen be involved with evidence? And why now, 8 years later, hours before my execution?" Rodriguez shrugged, clearly as confused as Nathan. "No idea. But whatever it is, it was convincing. Enough to wake the governor and stop a state execution 90 seconds before it started. That's not nothing." As the guard moved away to continue his rounds, Nathan sat on the edge of his bunk, his mind racing with possibilities. Aspen had been just 2 years old when Nathan was arrested. A vibrant young dog, still occasionally chewing shoes and digging holes in the backyard of the small house Nathan had purchased with his architectural design earnings. He had entrusted Aspen to his former girlfriend, Mia, when it became clear his legal troubles wouldn't be quickly resolved. The relationship with Mia hadn't survived his arrest. Few connections could withstand the strain of a murder charge, but she had agreed to care for Aspen, understanding the profound bond between man and dog. Over the years, their only contact had been brief updates about Aspen's health and occasional photographs sent through his lawyer. Now, somehow, Aspen and Detective Chen had delivered evidence compelling enough to halt his execution at the final moment. The coincidence seemed too precise to be accidental, yet Nathan couldn't imagine what connection existed between his dog and exonerating evidence after all this time. As midnight passed, and the early hours of what should have been the first day of his non-existence ticked by, Nathan found himself doing something he had carefully avoided for years, hoping. The sensation felt dangerous, almost painful in its unfamiliarity. Somewhere beyond the prison walls, something had changed. Someone was questioning the narrative that had condemned him, and somehow, inexplicably, Aspen was involved. His loyal companion, the friend who had never doubted his innocence, had perhaps found a way to proclaim that truth to a world that had refused to hear it from Nathan himself. Nathan lay back on his bunk, staring at the ceiling as the reality of his situation slowly registered. Yesterday, he had prepared to die. Today, he faced the uncertainty of continued existence. And for the first time in 8 years, that uncertainty carried not just the weight of continued confinement, but the fragile possibility of vindication. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The life Nathan Blackwood had built before his conviction had been meticulously designed, much like the award-winning buildings that had established his reputation in capital city's architectural community. Born to working-class parents in the industrial town of Millridge, Nathan had recognized early that his ticket out lay in the sketchpad his high school art teacher had given him after noticing his talent for drawing. "You see spaces differently," Mrs. Lowell had told him, flipping through his detailed renderings of reimagined school buildings and community centers. "You don't just see what is, you see what could be." That ability to envision possibility, where others saw only limitations, had carried Nathan through State University on a partial scholarship, supplemented by night shifts at a local manufacturing plant. The contrast between the factory's utilitarian design, all function, no inspiration, and the soaring concepts he studied during the day only strengthened his conviction that environments shaped human experience in profound ways. By 30, Nathan had founded Blackwood Design, a boutique architectural firm specializing in community spaces that balanced innovative design with environmental sustainability. His renovation of the historic Parkside Library had earned national recognition for preserving the building's classic elements while incorporating energy-efficient technologies invisible to visitors. The Capital City Arts Centre, with its dramatic glass facade that changed appearance with the shifting daylight, had cemented his reputation as an architect who could transform civic spaces into destinations. Success had brought financial security, but not extravagance. Nathan purchased a modest home on the edge of Riverview Park, a single-story mid-century modern house with large windows that flooded the interior with natural light. The property's true value lay in its location adjacent to miles of wooded trails, where he spent weekend mornings running, clearing his mind for the creative work that dominated his weekdays. It was during one of these morning runs that Aspen had entered his life. Nathan had noticed the German Shepherd puppy at the Clearwater Animal Shelter's adoption event in the park, isolated in a pen away from the other dogs. Unlike the energetic puppies clamoring for attention from passers-by, this one sat quietly observing, her unusual silver coat and amber eyes giving her an almost otherworldly appearance. "Why is she separated?" Nathan had asked the volunteer, managing the event. "Behavioral issues," the young woman had replied with obvious frustration. She escaped from 3 different foster homes in 2 weeks, digs under fences, figures out gate latches, even learned to open a sliding door somehow, too smart for her own good. She's scheduled for assessment tomorrow, but between us, her chances aren't good. Most people don't want a dog they can't outsmart. Something about the intelligent eyes tracking his movements had resonated with Nathan. On impulse, he had completed the adoption paperwork that morning, ignoring the volunteers' warnings about the puppy's escape artist tendencies and destructive behaviors. "We understand each other," he had told the skeptical shelter worker. "She doesn't need to be contained. She needs to be challenged." The puppy, whom he named Aspen after the silver-bark trees that lined his favorite mountain trails, had proven the wisdom of that insight. Rather than attempting to suppress her intelligence and problem-solving abilities, Nathan had channeled them through intensive training and mental stimulation. He enrolled them in advanced obedience classes, scent work, agility training, and eventually search and rescue workshops offered by the local emergency management agency. Aspen thrived with the challenges, her behavior issues disappearing as her mind found productive outlets. By her second year, she had mastered dozens of complex commands and could navigate elaborate obstacle courses with precision. More impressively, she had developed an uncanny ability to understand Nathan's intentions almost before he expressed them, anticipating which trail he would choose on their runs, retrieving specific items without being explicitly instructed, and alerting him to visitors approaching his property long before they became visible. Their bond had transcended the typical owner-pet relationship, becoming a partnership based on mutual understanding and respect. Aspen was not simply Nathan's companion, but his collaborator, accompanying him to construction sites where her presence somehow made clients feel more at ease, joining him for client meetings at the office where she would greet visitors with dignified restraint, and sitting beside his drafting table during late nights when he refined designs for particularly challenging projects. It was this established routine that made the events of October 17th, 8 years earlier, all the more incomprehensible. That morning had begun like countless others, a 5-mile run through Riverview Park with Aspen, followed by breakfast on the patio where Nathan reviewed client notes while Aspen monitored the yard for squirrel incursions. Nathan had an afternoon, meeting with the mayor's office about a potential renovation of City Hall, and he spent the morning refining his presentation materials. Around noon, he received a call from Catherine Wells, a former client whose contemporary art gallery Nathan had designed 3 years earlier. The gallery had become one of Capital City's cultural highlights, its innovative space credited with revitalizing the downtown arts district. Catherine mentioned a plumbing issue affecting one of the exhibition spaces and asked if Nathan could stop by to assess the problem before it potentially damaged a valuable installation. Though not strictly within his professional responsibilities, building maintenance typically fell to contractors rather than the architect. Nathan had agreed to visit the gallery that afternoon. He had pride in his buildings and considered their ongoing functionality part of his legacy. He would examine the issue before his City Hall meeting and recommend an appropriate specialist if necessary. That decision, a simple professional courtesy to a valued client, became the pivotal moment that destroyed the life he had built. When police discovered Catherine Wells' body in her gallery office that evening, security footage showed Nathan entering the building at 2:17 p.m. No footage captured him leaving, though the building's rear exit lacked camera coverage. His fingerprints appeared on the murder weapon, a distinctive letter opener from Catherine's desk. Most damningly, forensic analysis established the time of death between 2:30 and 3:10 p.m., precisely when Nathan had been inside the gallery. His explanation that he had examined the plumbing issue, spoken briefly with Catherine about potential solutions, and left through the rear service entrance as a shortcut to City Hall, found no supporting evidence. He had no alibi for the critical time period. The emergency plumber he called immediately after leaving the gallery could only confirm receiving his call at 3:10 p.m. after the estimated time of death. The prosecution constructed a compelling narrative around financial motives. Catherine's gallery was experiencing cash flow problems, and payment for Nathan's design services had been deferred through a complex arrangement that gave him a small percentage of the gallery's profits for 5 years, rather than an immediate fee. This arrangement, prosecutor Julia Martinez argued, had become a source of conflict as the gallery's financial difficulties intensified. According to financial records, Nathan had received only a fraction of his anticipated compensation. The defendant, Martinez told the jury during closing arguments, designed a beautiful space that enhanced Ms. Wells's artistic reputation while undermining his own financial stability. When it became clear that his innovative payment structure would never deliver the compensation he expected, he took matters into his own hands, permanently silencing the woman who he believed had taken advantage of his talent while withholding proper payment. Nathan's defense attorney, a public defender named Marcus Green, with minimal experience in homicide cases, had struggled to counter this narrative. Character witnesses from Nathan's professional circle testified to his integrity and patience with clients, but none could provide alternative explanations for the damning physical evidence. The jury deliberated for just 7 hours before returning a guilty verdict. The sentencing phase brought additional devastation. Catherine Wells's prominence in the arts community had made her murder a cause célèbre. The gallery owner came from a politically connected family. Her father had served as a state senator for 2 decades. Public pressure for justice translated to judicial severity, with Judge Eleanor Harmon imposing the death penalty despite Nathan's lack of prior criminal history. The appeals process consumed years, with each petition systematically denied, as courts upheld the physical evidence and motive established during the original trial. Nathan's architectural license was revoked. His firm, unable to survive its founder's conviction, dissolved within months. His savings depleted rapidly under the weight of legal expenses. Throughout this dismantling of his life, one relationship remained constant: his bond with Aspen. During the initial months of his incarceration, when he was still housed in the county detention center awaiting transfer to state prison, Mia had brought Aspen for weekly visits in the facility's outdoor visitation area. Those brief encounters, Aspen pressing against the chain-link fence that separated them, whining softly as she recognized Nathan but couldn't reach him, had provided his only connection to his former life. Once transferred to Lakeside Maximum Security Prison, such visits became impossible. The state facility permitted only human visitors with no provisions for animals. Mia sent photographs and occasional updates, but these grew less frequent as she gradually rebuilt her life without him. Her last visit occurred 3 years into his sentence, when she came to inform him she was moving to the West Coast for a career opportunity. She promised to continue caring for Aspen, but acknowledged the cross-country move would make any form of contact increasingly difficult. Since then, Nathan had received only sporadic updates through his successive appeals. Attorneys. He knew Aspen had developed arthritis in her hind legs as she aged. He knew she still slept on his old sweatshirt, which Mia had kept for her. He knew the intelligent dog still perked up at the mention of his name, even years after their separation. What he couldn't know, what no one could have anticipated, was how Aspen's remarkable intelligence and their profound bond would ultimately lead to the midnight phone call that had halted his execution. As Nathan lay on his bunk in the holding cell, the first fragile light of dawn filtering through the narrow window, he couldn't begin to imagine the chain of events that had been set in motion years earlier, or how his faithful companion had become the unlikely key to unlocking the truth about Catherine Wells' murder. Detective Alexandra Chen had never fully believed in Nathan Blackwood's guilt. As a rookie, assigned to Detective James Sullivan 8 years ago, she had observed the investigation with the quiet diligence expected of a junior officer still proving herself in Capital City's competitive police department. But beneath her, professional composure, questions had accumulated, small inconsistencies in the evidence, subtle pressure from political forces, and investigative shortcuts that troubled her methodical mind. Sullivan had been 3 months from retirement when Catherine Wells's murder landed on his desk. A decorated detective with an impressive clearance rate, he approached the high-profile case with the confident efficiency of a man who had seen it all before. When the evidence pointed to Nathan Blackwood, Sullivan had pursued that single theory, with unwavering focus, dismissing alternative possibilities with the certainty of experience. The simplest explanation is usually correct, he had told Alex when she cautiously suggested exploring other potential suspects. We have the architect entering the building during our time window, his fingerprints on the murder weapon, and a clear financial motive. Sometimes the case really is that straightforward. But Alex had never found comfort in simplicity at the expense of thoroughness. During her final year at the police academy, she had distinguished herself by solving a complex training scenario that had stumped her classmates, not through brilliant deduction, but through painstaking attention to overlooked details that collectively revealed a different narrative than the obvious one. That same instinct had nagged at her throughout the Blackwood investigation. The timeline felt too perfect, the evidence too neatly packaged. Nathan's behavior after leaving the gallery, immediately calling a plumber, proceeding to his scheduled meeting at City Hall, and later returning calls from gallery staff trying to reach Catherine, seemed inconsistent with someone who had just committed murder. Most troubling was the execution of the crime itself. Catherine Wells had been stabbed with methodical precision, a single wound that severed her carotid artery. The medical examiner had noted the unusual control exhibited by the killer, suggesting someone with knowledge of human anatomy or experience with similar attacks. Nathan Blackwood, with his background in architectural design and no history of violence, seemed an unlikely candidate for such clinical efficiency. But as a junior detective, still establishing her credibility, Alex had kept these concerns largely to herself. When the trial concluded with Blackwood's conviction, She had filed away her doubts alongside her case notes, focusing instead on building her career. Over the subsequent 8 years, she had risen through the ranks on her own merits, eventually making detective first grade and establishing a reputation for solving complex cases that others had abandoned. The Wells murder, however, had never completely released its hold on her conscience. On 3 separate occasions over the years, Alex had spent personal time reviewing the case files, searching for something tangible that might justify reopening the investigation. Each time, she had reluctantly concluded that her concerns, while valid, weren't substantial enough to challenge a conviction that had been upheld through multiple appeals. Until 6 months ago, when everything changed. The catalyst arrived in the form of Richard Mendez, a career criminal arrested in connection with a series of high-end art thefts. Facing his 3rd strike and a potential life sentence, Mendez had offered information on numerous unsolved crimes in exchange for consideration during sentencing. Most of his revelations proved insignificant or already known to authorities, but one offhand comment about that gallery owner years back had jolted Alex's attention. "Wells? The one the architect went down for?" Alex had asked during the interview, working to keep her tone casual. Mendez had smiled with the knowing look of a man aware he held valuable currency. "That architect had nothing to do with it. That was professional work, Vincent Calabresi's crew. I heard they were moving product through the gallery's international shipments. Clean operation until Wells started asking questions. Vincent Calabresi, a notorious figure in capital city's organized crime hierarchy, specializing in art theft and forgery. His operation had been dismantled 3 years earlier through a joint FBI local task force, with Calabrese himself now serving 20 years in federal prison. The connection hadn't been on anyone's radar during the original Wells investigation. Alex had immediately pursued this new lead, but with appropriate caution. Criminal informants were notoriously unreliable, especially when seeking leniency. She needed corroboration before taking action that might reopen old wounds or raise false hopes. The breakthrough came when she discovered shipping records that confirmed unusual patterns in the gallery's international art movements during the period before Catherine's murder. Several pieces had been shipped to private collectors in countries known for lax oversight of art imports, only to reappear months later in different exhibitions under slightly modified provenance details. Alex compiled her findings into a preliminary report, intending to present it through official channels to determine if it justified reopening the investigation. The report sat completed on her desktop for 3 days, while she gathered courage to submit it, knowing the department's likely resistance to revisiting a closed case where the convicted perpetrator had exhausted all appeals. Then came the newspaper article announcing Nathan Blackwood's execution date. The suddenness of the announcement hit Alex with unexpected force. She had known abstractly that Blackwood's final appeal had been denied months earlier, but seeing the scheduled date in stark black print, just 2 weeks away, transformed an intellectual concern into an urgent moral crisis. That evening, after completing her shift, Alex had made an unplanned detour to Mia Richardson's last known address, a modest apartment complex on the city's west side. Property records showed Richardson had sold the unit 4 years earlier before her cross-country move, but Alex hoped the current residents might have forwarding information. Instead, she found an elderly woman walking a silver-coated German shepherd with distinctive amber eyes. "Excuse me," Alex had called, recognizing the dog immediately from case photographs. "Is that Aspen?" The woman had regarded her with suspicion, instinctively shortening the leash. "Who's asking?" Alex identified herself, showing her badge, while maintaining a non-threatening distance. "I'm investigating something connected to Nathan Blackwood. I thought his dog was with Mia Richardson in California." "Mia was my niece," the woman explained, her expression softening slightly. "She passed away last year, aggressive breast cancer. She made arrangements for Aspen to come back to me. I was friends with Nathan before." Everything. Mia knew I'd understand how special this connection was. Margaret Peterson introduced herself as a retired veterinary technician who had helped Nathan select Aspen from the shelter years earlier. After Mia's death, she had devoted herself to caring for the aging dog, honoring both her niece's memory and her friendship with Nathan. "He's scheduled for execution in 2 weeks, Alex said quietly, watching Aspen's ears perk up at the mention of her former owner. "I know," Margaret replied, her voice breaking slightly. "We've been visiting him as often as they'll allow, though they won't let Aspen into the facility. I park near the prison entrance, where he might see us from his window. I don't know if he can, but it gives me some comfort to think he might." The woman's dedication moved Alex deeply. "Ms. Peterson, I've been investigating Catherine Wells's murder, and I've found evidence suggesting Nathan might actually be innocent. I was planning to submit my findings through official channels, but given the timeline..." Margaret's eyes had widened. "You believe he didn't do it?" "All these years I've told people the same thing, but no one would listen." "I can't promise anything," Alex cautioned, "but I'd like to hear anything you know that might help, especially anything Nathan might have told you about that day." Over coffee in Margaret's small kitchen, with Aspen resting her head heavily on Alex's lap as though sensing her importance, the two women had shared information that collectively illuminated aspects of the case neither had fully understood alone. Margaret revealed that Nathan had mentioned something odd about the gallery's storage room during his final visit. Unusually heavy security for a space supposedly containing only exhibition materials. He had noticed a keypad lock on an interior door while examining the plumbing issue, something not included in his original design. "He thought it was strange but not his business," Margaret explained. "He mentioned it only because he had to work around the new installation to access the water shutoff valve." This detail aligned perfectly with Alex's developing theory about art smuggling operations. A secured area within the storage room would be ideal for temporarily housing illegitimate artwork being prepared for international shipment. As they talked, Aspen had grown increasingly animated, moving between them with obvious agitation. Finally, the dog had trotted to the closet near the front door, pawing at it insistently. "She wants her special box," Margaret explained, rising to open the closet. "Mia kept everything Nathan gave her for safekeeping in this old tackle box. Aspen knows it's connected to him somehow. She does this whenever we talk about Nathan." The weathered metal box contained documents Nathan had entrusted to Mia before his arrest, the deed to his house, insurance policies, and various personal papers. But beneath these ordinary items lay something unexpected, a small leather notebook, filled with detailed observations about the gallery's operations. "I never knew this was here," Margaret said, turning the pages with growing astonishment. Nathan documented irregular shipments, unusual visitors after hours, conversations he overheard between Catherine and someone named Vincent. He was building a case to present to Catherine. He suspected someone was using her gallery for illegal trafficking. Alex felt the pieces clicking into place with satisfying precision. If Nathan had discovered Calabrese's operation and planned to alert Catherine, he would have represented a significant threat. But why frame him so elaborately, rather than simply eliminating both threats? The answer came from Nathan's final entry, dated the morning of the murder. "Meeting C today about plumbing issue. Will bring up security concerns if appropriate. Received strange call last night. Male voice, no identification, warning me to mind my own designs and forget what I've seen." Clearly meant to intimidate, have saved call recording as insurance. "A recording," Alex breathed, her pulse quickening. "Does it mention anything about where he saved it?" Margaret shook her head, but Aspen suddenly barked once, sharply, and moved toward a small desk in the corner of the living room. The dog pawed at the lowest drawer, looking back expectantly at the women. "She's never done that before," Margaret said, crossing to open the drawer. Inside lay a small digital voice recorder, the kind journalists often used for interviews, alongside a USB drive labeled simply "Backup." Both had been stored in a plastic bag containing one of Nathan's old T-shirts, preserving his scent over the years. "She knew," Margaret whispered, her eyes filling with tears. All this time she knew where he kept it. Alex handled the recorder carefully, pressing play while holding her breath. A male voice with a subtle accent filled the room. "Listen carefully, architect. You've been noticed asking questions that don't concern you. The gallery has arrangements that benefit everyone involved. Mind your own designs and forget what you've seen, or your next project will be your mausoleum. This is your only warning." The timestamp matched the date in Nathan's journal, the night before Catherine's murder. "This changes everything," Alex said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. "This establishes that Nathan was being threatened because of what he discovered, combined with the shipping inconsistencies and Mendez's statement." "Is it enough?" Margaret asked, hope battling with caution in her expression. "To stop the execution?" "Absolutely," Alex confirmed. "To overturn his conviction immediately, that's more complicated, but it's certainly enough to demand a full reinvestigation." The realization of what they had discovered and how little time remained before Nathan's scheduled execution created an immediate sense of urgency. Through Aspen's remarkable memory and instinctive understanding, they had uncovered the evidence that might save an innocent man's life. But as Alex would soon discover, delivering this evidence through proper channels would prove more challenging than finding it. The system that had convicted Nathan Blackwood would not easily acknowledge its mistake, especially with powerful forces potentially working to maintain the original narrative. The Capital City Justice Center stood as a monument to bureaucratic authority, a 12-story fortress of grey stone and tinted glass, where the machinery of legal process operated with methodical precision. Detective Alexandra Chen had visited this building hundreds of times during her career, but never with the sense of desperate urgency that propelled her through the security checkpoint at 7:15 a.m., less than 8 hours after discovering Nathan's recorded evidence. "I need to speak with District Attorney Lawrence immediately," she informed the receptionist at the DA's office, her badge already displayed. "It concerns an imminent execution where new exculpatory evidence has emerged." The receptionist, a young man with a carefully neutral expression, regarded her with practiced politeness. "District Attorney Lawrence is in meetings all morning. I can schedule you for a brief appointment tomorrow afternoon." "Tomorrow will be too late," Alex insisted, her voice lowered but intense. "Nathan Blackwood is scheduled for execution tonight. This evidence suggests he's innocent of Catherine Wells' murder." The receptionist's expression flickered briefly before returning to professional detachment. "I understand, Detective, but protocols exist for submitting new evidence in capital cases. I can direct you to the appropriate forms." "I don't need forms," Alex interrupted, struggling to maintain her composure. "I need 10 minutes with Lawrence. The evidence is time-sensitive and compelling." After a tense standoff, the receptionist reluctantly made a call to Lawrence's assistant, speaking in hushed tones that prevented Alex from hearing the full conversation. When he hung up, his expression revealed nothing. "Ms. Winters, the DA's Chief of Staff, can see you briefly. 3rd, floor room 317. Veronica Winters had built her reputation as District Attorney Lawrence's most effective gatekeeper, a Harvard-educated attorney who had chosen to manage the administrative aspects of justice rather than argue in courtrooms. She greeted Alex with professional courtesy that didn't reach her calculating eyes. "Detective Chen, I understand you're here about the Blackwood execution," she began, gesturing toward a chair across from her immaculate desk. "Lawrence is preparing for the Daniels trial and cannot be interrupted, but I'm authorized to evaluate any concerns on his behalf." Alex placed her evidence folder on the desk. "I have compelling evidence suggesting Nathan Blackwood was framed for Catherine Wells's murder by Vincent Calabrese's organization. The gallery was being used to move stolen or forged artwork internationally. Wells and Blackwood both discovered this operation and were targeted as a result." Winter's expression remained studiedly neutral as Alex methodically presented her findings. The shipping inconsistencies, Mendez's statement, Nathan's journal, and finally, the recorded threat. When the threatening voice finished playing from Alex's phone, Winters leaned back slightly. "This is certainly interesting, Detective, but I'm not sure it rises to the level of exculpatory evidence. The voice makes no specific references to murder or to Ms. Wells. It could be interpreted as a standard business dispute with an aggressive competitor. Combined with everything else, it establishes that Blackwood was being threatened because he discovered illegal activity at the gallery," Alex countered. "It directly contradicts the prosecution's theory that he killed Wells over payment issues." Winters made a note on her legal pad. "I'll convey your concerns to Lawrence, but realistically, Detective, this doesn't meet the threshold for an emergency stay. The recorded threat is suggestive, but not conclusive. The shipping irregularities are circumstantial, and Mendez's statement is from a career criminal seeking leniency." "A man's life is at stake," Alex said, her frustration breaking through her professional demeanor. "At minimum, this evidence justifies delaying the execution until a proper investigation can be conducted. The courts have reviewed Mr. Blackwood's case extensively through multiple appeals," Winters replied, her tone cooling. "Each appeal raised various concerns, and each was systematically rejected. The threshold for intervening at this stage is extraordinarily high." Alex leaned forward, her voice dropping. "Is the threshold higher than our obligation to justice? If we execute an innocent man because we're too invested in our original narrative to consider new evidence, what are we protecting?" Something flickered in Winter's eyes. Discomfort, perhaps, or recognition of the moral weight Alex had placed on the conversation. She gathered the documents into a neat stack and stood. "I'll personally bring this to Lawrence's attention within the hour," she said finally. "That's the most I can promise. The decision ultimately rests with him, and I should warn you that he was the supervising prosecutor on the original case. He has complete confidence in the verdict." As Alex left the Justice Center, the morning sun did little to warm the chill of institutional resistance she had encountered. Despite Winter's assurance, she doubted the evidence would receive fair consideration. Lawrence had built his early career on the Blackwood conviction. Acknowledging a potential mistake now, especially one with connections to organized crime that should have been investigated, would raise uncomfortable questions about the office's thoroughness and integrity. Her suspicions were confirmed 3 hours later when her phone rang. "Detective Chen, this is D.A. Lawrence," the clipped voice announced without preamble. "I've reviewed the materials you submitted regarding Nathan Blackwood. While I appreciate your diligence, this office does not find sufficient grounds to intervene in the scheduled execution." "Sir, with respect," Alex began. "The evidence is circumstantial at best," Lawrence continued, speaking over her objection. "The recorded threat makes no specific mention of murder. The shipping irregularities, while possibly suggesting impropriety at the gallery, don't exonerate Blackwood of Wells's murder, and statements from jailhouse informants are notoriously unreliable." "Then allow me to present this evidence to the governor's office," Alex pressed. Let them make an independent assessment. A pause followed, lengthy enough to suggest deliberation. That would be inappropriate, Detective. Evidence in criminal. Matters should proceed through proper channels, meaning this office. I'm declining to forward these materials to the governor because they don't meet evidentiary standards. The implication was clear. Lawrence was blocking the path to the only authority who could stop the execution with a last-minute stay. I understand, sir, Alex replied, her mind already formulating alternative approaches. Thank you for your consideration. She ended the call and immediately dialed Margaret Peterson's number. They're stonewalling, she explained when Margaret answered. Lawrence won't forward the evidence to the governor, and he's effectively blocking official channels. What do we do? Margaret asked, her voice strained with anxiety. Alex had spent the intervening hours researching procedures for emergency stays of execution. The governor could grant a temporary reprieve without the DA's involvement, but typically relied on recommendations from legal authorities. Direct appeals to the governor's office were possible, but rarely successful without institutional support. We go directly to the governor, Alex decided. Not through official bureaucracy, but personally. Governor Harrington holds public office. Hours every Thursday at the Capitol. Today, from 3 to 5 p.m. Citizens can meet with her briefly about pressing concerns. Will she see us? Margaret asked. Especially with Aspen? Service animals are permitted in government buildings, Alex replied. And Aspen isn't just a pet. She's a material witness who led us to crucial evidence. The governor needs to see her to understand the full context. The execution is scheduled for midnight, Margaret reminded her. That doesn't leave much time if something goes wrong. Then we make sure nothing goes wrong, Alex said with determination that belied her own uncertainty. Meet me at the Capitol steps at 2:30. Bring Nathan's journal, the recorder, and Aspen. I'll bring everything else we need. The state capitol building presented an even more formidable barrier than the Justice Center. Security was heightened due to recent protests, with state police checking identification and scanning all visitors. The line for the governor's public hours stretched down the marble hallway, filled with citizens clutching folders of paperwork and practiced arguments for various causes. Alex and Margaret joined the queue, Aspen sitting vigilantly beside them. The German shepherd's unusual colouring and dignified bearing drew curious glances, but her service vest prevented questions about her presence. We may only get 2 minutes. With the governor, Alex explained quietly as they inched forward. I'll present the core evidence as concisely as possible. Margaret, if I'm cut off, you need to emphasize that Nathan documented his suspicions before the murder and was being threatened. Aspen's role in preserving and locating the evidence demonstrates both his innocence and the extraordinary circumstances. Margaret nodded, her hand absently stroking Aspen's head. And if she refuses? Alex had considered this possibility extensively. Then we moved to Plan B. I have contacts in the media, journalists who might publicize this evidence quickly. Enough to create public pressure. I've already prepared secure digital copies of everything. The contingency felt desperately inadequate against the momentum of a state execution. But Alex kept this thought to herself. Margaret needed hope to maintain her resolve through what would likely be a difficult confrontation. When they finally reached the anteroom to the governor's office, their hopes dimmed further. An aide explained that the governor was running behind schedule and would be limiting remaining appointments to 1 minute each. Additionally, they would need to explain their purpose before being granted access. We have evidence of innocence in today's scheduled execution, Alex stated firmly, showing her badge. Nathan Blackwood was framed for Catherine Wells's murder by an organized crime syndicate We have documentation and recordings proving he was being threatened for discovering their operation. The aide's expression revealed nothing. Wait here, please. 5 excruciating minutes passed before the aide returned with another official, an older man whose bearing suggested significant authority. I'm Howard Reeves, the governor's chief counsel, he introduced himself. I understand you're here. About the Blackwood execution, the governor's schedule is extremely compressed, but given the time-sensitive nature, I've been asked to evaluate your concerns. Alex recognized the deflection tactic, the same one the DA's office had employed. They were being diverted to an intermediary who would filter what reached the governor. With respect, Mr. Reeves, this evidence needs the governor's direct attention, Alex insisted. A man's life depends on her judgment, not on preliminary screening. Reeves's expression hardened slightly. Detective, the governor relies on her staff to ensure efficient use of her limited time. I'm offering you the opportunity to present your concerns to someone with direct access to her. The alternative is joining the standard clemency petition process, which I should note closed for Mr. Blackwood's case 3 weeks ago. The implicit threat was clear. Cooperate with the diversion or be excluded entirely. Very well, Alex conceded, recognizing their vulnerable position. But I want to be clear that we attempted to present this through the DA's office first and were blocked. Reeves led them to a small conference room where Alex once again presented the evidence, this time with even greater concision. She emphasized the interconnected nature of the findings, how each piece reinforced the others to create a coherent alternative explanation for Catherine Wells' murder. Throughout the presentation, Aspen remained alertly focused on the evidence materials, occasionally nudging the recorder or journal as though confirming their importance. This behavior, which might have seemed coincidental in other circumstances, created a compelling visual demonstration of the dog's unusual connection to the case. When Alex finished, Reeves gathered the documents methodically, his expression revealing nothing of his assessment. I'll review these materials immediately and consult with the governor, he stated. Please wait here. Someone will inform you of her decision. As the door closed behind him, Margaret turned to Alex with visible anxiety. He's going to bury this, isn't he? Just like the DA did. Alex wanted to offer reassurance, but couldn't bring herself to manufacture false hope. It's possible. Political considerations sometimes outweigh justice, especially when admitting a mistake might reflect poorly on the system. So Nathan dies because people can't admit they were wrong? Margaret's voice broke on the question. Before Alex could respond, Aspen suddenly stood, her attention fixed on the door with unusual intensity. Seconds later, it opened to reveal not Reeves but Governor Eleanor Harrington herself. The governor, a former prosecutor known for her tough-on-crime stance and no-nonsense demeanor, entered without ceremony, closing the door firmly behind her. Her calculating gaze took in the room's occupants, lingering on Aspen with particular interest. Detective Chen, Ms. Peterson, she acknowledged with a curt nod. Howard has briefed me on your concerns. I'm here because I have questions that only you can answer. Governor Eleanor Harrington had built her political career on an image of unflinching strength. Her tailored suits, impeccable posture, and direct gaze conveyed authority that had carried her from district attorney to the governor's mansion with remarkable speed. Standing in the small conference room, she seemed larger than her physical stature, a presence that commanded attention without effort. I have precisely 17 minutes before my next commitment, she stated, her tone businesslike as she took a seat at the head of the table. During that time, I need to determine whether there is sufficient cause to delay an execution sanctioned by multiple courts over 8 years of appeals. Detective Chen, convince me. Alex felt the weight of This unexpected opportunity, the governor hadn't delegated their case or dismissed it outright. She had come personally to evaluate their evidence. This alone represented a significant departure from institutional patterns. Governor Nathan Blackwood was convicted of murdering Catherine Wells based on circumstantial evidence and a prosecutor's narrative about financial disputes. Alex began, speaking with measured precision. We've discovered evidence indicating Wells and Blackwood were both targeted by Vincent Calabresi's organization because they separately discovered an art smuggling operation running through the gallery. The governor's expression remained impassive, as Alex methodically outlined the shipping irregularities she had identified, connecting them to patterns later discovered in Calabresi's other operations after his federal indictment. She explained how Nathan's journal documented his growing suspicions about unusual security measures and after-hours visitors at the gallery. Most critically, Alex continued, pressing play on the voice recorder, this threat was received by Blackwood the night before Wells' murder. The accented voice filled the room. Listen carefully, architect. You've been noticed asking questions that don't concern you. The gallery has arrangements that benefit everyone involved. Mind your own designs and forget what you've seen, or your next project will be your mausoleum. This is your only warning. Governor Harrington listened without interruption, her fingers steepled beneath her chin. When the recording ended, she turned her attention to Margaret. Ms. Peterson, you were friends with the condemned man before his conviction. How did you come to possess this evidence? Margaret explained her connection through her niece Mia, detailing how Aspen had come into her care after Mia's death. Nathan entrusted these materials to Mia for safekeeping before his arrest. The recorder and backups were stored with items carrying his scent. That's how Aspen was able to locate them after all these years. The governor's gaze shifted to the German shepherd, who sat with unusual stillness, amber eyes fixed on Harrington, with an intensity that might have seemed inappropriate in a human. The dog recognized evidence related to her former owner after 8 years of separation. Aspen isn't an ordinary dog, Margaret explained, her hand resting gently on the shepherd's silver coat. Nathan trained her extensively in scent detection and complex problem-solving. Their bond was extraordinary. She's maintained her connection to him despite their long separation. Governor Harrington considered this, her expression revealing nothing of her thoughts. Why wasn't this evidence presented during the original trial or subsequent appeals? Because Nathan didn't know its significance at the time, Alex answered. He documented his observations about gallery irregularities out of professional curiosity, not because he suspected criminal activity that might later lead to murder. The threatening call came just before Catherine's death, and he was arrested before he could connect these elements to her murder. As for why Mia never came forward, Margaret added, she tried initially. She contacted Nathan's public defender about the journal, but he dismissed it as irrelevant since it didn't directly address the murder. After that rejection, combined with the overwhelming evidence against Nathan and the public certainty of his guilt, she became afraid of being accused of evidence fabrication or obstruction. The governor checked her watch, a subtle gesture that nonetheless heightened the tension in the room. Why has Detective Sullivan, the lead investigator on the original case, not supported your re-examination? The question struck directly at a vulnerability Alex had hoped to avoid. Detective Sullivan retired shortly after the conviction. I've attempted to contact him regarding these new findings, but he's been unreachable. Something in Harrington's expression suggested this answer had confirmed a private suspicion. And District Attorney Lawrence, I understand you presented this evidence to his office this morning. He declined to forward the materials to your office, Alex confirmed, maintaining professional neutrality despite her frustration. He stated that the evidence didn't meet the threshold for reconsideration. Yet you chose to circumvent his authority by coming directly to me, Harrington observed, her tone making it unclear whether she approved of this initiative or considered it insubordination. When an execution is hours away and evidence suggests innocence, procedural channels become secondary to preventing an irreversible injustice, Alex replied, meeting the governor's gaze directly. I believe any delay in presenting this evidence would constitute dereliction of my duty as a law enforcement officer. An unexpected respect flickered in Harrington's eyes. She turned her attention to Aspen, who continued watching her with uncanny focus. A remarkable animal, she observed. I had a German shepherd during my years as a prosecutor. Extraordinary intelligence and loyalty. Mine once alerted me to an intruder in my home before they'd even entered the building. This personal aside, the verse crack in her official demeanor, suggested the governor might have more connection to their situation than her formal evaluation indicated. "Governor," Margaret said, seizing the opening. Nathan's final words before his scheduled injection were about Aspen, that he wished she knew he was innocent. His last thought wasn't about himself, but about his dog's understanding of the truth. That speaks to the kind of man he is. Harrington didn't respond directly to this emotional appeal, instead opening a folder she had brought with her. I reviewed the trial transcripts while Howard examined your evidence. The case against Blackwood was compelling, but entirely circumstantial. No witnesses to the murder, no blood evidence on his clothing, no history of violence. The prosecutor constructed a narrative about financial motive that the jury found convincing, but it was never definitively proven. She closed the folder with deliberate precision. What troubles me most is that Vincent Calabrese's connection to the gallery was never investigated, despite his known operations in the art world. This represents, at minimum, an investigative oversight. The governor stood, smoothing her jacket in a gesture that signaled the meeting's conclusion. I need to confer with my legal team. Wait here. As she moved toward the door, Aspen suddenly rose and stepped into her path, not aggressively, but with clear intent. The shepherd made direct eye contact with the governor, then turned to look pointedly at the evidence materials on the table. The room froze in collective tension. Governor Harrington, rather than appearing affronted by the dog's unusual behavior, studied Aspen with heightened interest. Ms. Peterson, does she typically intervene like this? Only when something is critically important, Margaret answered, her voice reflecting both apology and wonder at Aspen's timing. She was trained to alert decisively in search and rescue situations when time was essential. The governor held Aspen's gaze for a moment longer, then nodded slightly, as though acknowledging the unspoken urgency. I understand. After Harrington's departure, the small conference room fell into tense silence. Alex checked her watch, nearly 4:30 p.m., with less than 8 hours remaining before Nathan's scheduled execution. The bureaucratic machinery preparing for that event would already be in advanced stages, with protocols and personnel positioned according to established timelines. Any intervention would need to overcome significant institutional momentum. "What do you think?" Margaret finally asked, her hand absently stroking Aspen's coat. Was she receptive? It's difficult to tell, Alex admitted. Governor Harrington built her career on being tough on crime. Granting a stay of execution for a man convicted of murdering a prominent citizen would contradict her public image. But if she believes he's innocent, politics and justice don't always align neatly, Alex explained gently. Admitting a mistake of this magnitude in the system she helped build would have cascading implications for her administration, for public confidence in the judicial process. for everyone who participated in Nathan's conviction. So an innocent man might die because acknowledging his innocence would be politically inconvenient. Margaret's voice carried the edge of someone confronting systemic injustice for the first time. The realization that institutions designed to protect could sometimes perpetuate harm rather than correct it. Not necessarily, Alex countered, unwilling to surrender hope completely. Governor Harrington is politically pragmatic, but she's also built her reputation on precise adherence to legal standards. If she believes our evidence creates legitimate, you doubt she might grant a temporary stay while positioning it as procedural thoroughness rather than admission of systemic failure. The minutes stretched painfully as they waited, each passing moment diminishing the narrow window for intervention. Aspen, who had returned to her position beside Margaret after the governor's departure, maintained a vigilant posture that somehow communicated more optimism than either woman felt. After 43 minutes, well beyond the governor's stated 17-minute timeline, Howard Reeves returned, his expression carefully neutral. "The governor has reviewed your evidence in consultation with her legal advisors," he announced formally. "She has determined that the materials presented raise sufficient questions to justify additional investigation before carrying out the irrevocable action of execution." The carefully worded statement contained the outcome they had sought without explicitly acknowledging Nathan's potential innocence or systemic failure. It was a masterful political framing that allowed for justice while minimizing institutional disruption. "She has issued a 30-day stay of execution to allow for proper examination of this new evidence," Reeves continued. "During this period, a special investigative task force will review all aspects of the case, including the potential connection to Vincent Calabresi's organization." Relief flooded through Alex so powerfully that she momentarily struggled to maintain her professional composure. "Will Nathan Blackwood be informed immediately of this development?" "The governor is personally calling Warden Morales as we speak," Reeves confirmed. "The execution preparations will be halted, and Mr. Blackwood will return to his regular cell pending further legal developments." Margaret made no attempt to hide her emotional response, tears flowing freely as she knelt to embrace Aspen. "He's not safe yet, but he has time now," she whispered to the dog, who responded with a soft whine that somehow conveyed understanding of the situation's gravity. "Detective Chen," Reeves continued, his tone shifting slightly, "the governor has requested that you personally participate in the investigative task force, given your familiarity with the new evidence. However, she wants to be clear that this appointment doesn't represent endorsement of your decision to circumvent standard procedures." Alex recognized the dual nature of the governor's message, professional recognition combined with gentle reprimand for breaking chain of command. It was a nuanced response that acknowledged the value of her work while maintaining necessary hierarchical boundaries. "I understand," she replied. "Please convey my gratitude for the opportunity to assist with this investigation." As they gathered their materials and prepared to leave, Reeves added one final note. "The governor also asked me to convey a personal message regarding your canine companion. She said, 'Some bonds transcend ordinary understanding. That dog knew what humans had, forgotten that truth matters more than procedure.'" This unexpected philosophical comment from the typically pragmatic governor suggested that Aspen's intervention had resonated on a level beyond political calculation. Something in the dog's unflinching certainty had pierced the layers of bureaucratic insulation that often separated decision-makers from the human consequences of their choices. Outside the Capitol building, the late afternoon sunlight cast long shadows across the granite steps. News vans had already begun gathering at the perimeter, suggesting word of the stay had leaked to the media. Soon, the narrative of Nathan's case would enter a new public phase, with all the scrutiny and controversy that entailed. "What happens now?" Margaret asked as they descended toward the parking area. "The stay buys us time, not certainty," Alex explained. "We've opened the door to reinvestigation, but we still need to build an irrefutable case that connects Calabrese's organization to Catherine's murder and proves Nathan's innocence beyond question." "Can we visit Nathan now? Let him know what's happened and that Aspen helped save his life?" Alex considered the question. Prison protocols typically restricted visitation to scheduled hours and approved individuals. However, the extraordinary circumstances might justify exceptions. "I'll contact Warden Morales directly," she decided. Given the situation, he might permit a special visitation, especially since Nathan's last request specifically involved seeing Aspen. As Alex made the call, Aspen sat with uncharacteristic stillness, her amber eyes fixed on the distant horizon beyond the Capitol building. Something in the dog's posture suggested not just awareness of their success, but anticipation of the reunion that now became possible, a connection maintained across 8 years of separation that would finally be restored. The execution had been stayed, but the greater challenge remained, proving Nathan's innocence conclusively enough to secure not just temporary reprieve, but full exoneration. The machinery of justice that had moved so inexorably toward his execution would not easily reverse direction without compelling evidence that left no room for doubt. Yet in this moment of provisional victory, hope felt not just possible, but tangible. A path forward illuminated by the combined efforts of a detective who questioned comfortable certainties, a woman who honored her promises to the absent, and a dog whose extraordinary loyalty had preserved the truth until the world was ready to hear it. Lakeside Maximum Security Prison's visiting area had never been designed for comfort. The institutional room, with its bolted-down metal furniture, fluorescent lighting, and omnipresent surveillance cameras, emphasized security over human connection. Yet today, as Nathan Blackwood waited for his first visitors since the unexpected stay of execution, the austere space seemed almost welcoming. 36 hours had passed since the midnight reprieve. Nathan had spent most of that time in a state of cautious disbelief, unwilling to fully embrace hope after years of systematic disappointment. The warden had provided minimal details, only that Governor Harrington had issued a stay based on new evidence requiring investigation. No specifics about the evidence or who had brought it forward. When the guard informed him that Detective Alexandra Chen and Margaret Peterson had arranged a special visitation with approval for Aspen to accompany them, Nathan's carefully maintained emotional control had finally wavered. The prospect of seeing his dog after 8 years of separation overwhelmed him more deeply than his own brush with death. The door to the visiting area opened, and Nathan rose instinctively from his chair. Detective Chen entered first, a woman he vaguely recognized from his original investigation, though she had aged from a rookie officer into a seasoned detective. Behind her came Margaret Peterson, whose letters and occasional photographs of Aspen had provided rare moments of connection to his former life. And then, moving with the deliberate pace of an older dog, but with unmistakable purpose, came Aspen. The German shepherd stopped in the doorway, her amber eyes scanning the room until they found Nathan. For a moment, both remained perfectly still. Man and dog separated by 8 years and 20 feet of institutional flooring, each apparently needing to confirm the reality of the other's presence. "Aspen," Nathan whispered, dropping to one knee. And extending his hand, the name acted as release. Aspen moved forward with sudden urgency, crossing the distance between them with the fluid motion that had characterized her younger days. She pressed against Nathan with her entire body, whining softly as she buried her head against his chest. Nathan's arms encircled the dog's silver-coated form, his fingers finding the familiar contours now altered by age, but still essentially Aspen. The texture of her fur, the particular weight of her against his chest, the distinctive way she leaned into his embrace, these sensations bypassed conscious thought and connected directly to memory, collapsing the years of separation into something that felt simultaneously like forever and merely moments. "You remembered me," he murmured against her ear, his voice breaking on the simple observation. Aspen responded by pressing closer, her entire body quivering with the effort to somehow reduce the remaining space between them. For several minutes, neither moved. From this position, locked in a reunion that transcended ordinary understanding of animal cognition or human emotion, Detective Chen and Margaret remained respectfully silent, allowing this private reconnection to unfold without interruption. Only when Nathan finally looked up, his eyes bright with unshed tears, did they approach. "She saved your life," Margaret said simply, taking a seat at the metal table. Aspen found the evidence that convinced Governor Harrington to issue the stay. Nathan straightened slowly, keeping one hand on Aspen's head as though afraid she might disappear if he broke contact completely. "What evidence? No one would tell me anything specific." Detective Chen sat across from him, placing a folder on the table. "We found your journal documenting irregularities at Catherine Wells' gallery, along with the recorded threat you received the night before her murder." Nathan's expression transformed from confusion to dawning comprehension. "The voice recorder, I'd almost forgotten. After that threatening call, I started documenting everything as insurance. But how did you find it after all this time?" "Aspen showed us," Margaret explained, her voice warm with pride. "When we mentioned your name, she led us directly to the storage box, and then specifically to the desk drawer where you'd hidden the recorder in your scent-marked shirt." Nathan's hand stilled on Aspen's head, his gaze dropping to meet the dog's steady eyes. "You knew exactly where everything was, didn't you, girl? All this time you remembered." Aspen's tail swept once against the floor in what seemed like confirmation. Detective Chen opened the folder, revealing copies of the evidence that had halted Nathan's execution. "We connected your observations with shipping irregularities at the gallery that align with Vincent Calabrese's known art smuggling operations. We believe Catherine discovered the same operation independently and was killed to prevent exposure. You were framed to provide a convenient explanation that diverted attention from the real perpetrators." "Calabrese," Nathan repeated, the name registering with painful clarity. "Catherine mentioned him once, said he was interested in partnering with the gallery for international exhibitions. She seemed uncomfortable with the idea, but wouldn't elaborate. I never made the connection." "You couldn't have known, Detective," Chen assured him. "Calabrese was masterful at maintaining legitimate appearances. Even after his organization was dismantled 3 years ago for art trafficking, his connection to the Wells Gallery was never investigated. That oversight is now the focus of our reinvestigation." Nathan processed this information with the deliberate care of someone accustomed to evaluating evidence rather than reacting emotionally. "So the stay is temporary, pending reinvestigation?" "Yes," Detective Chen confirmed. "Governor Harrington has appointed a special task force to examine all evidence, both from the original case and our new findings. I've been assigned to that team, which gives me access to resources and authority I wouldn't have had working alone." "What are the chances?" Nathan asked directly, his years on death row having stripped away any inclination toward comfortable self-deception. "Realistically, what are the chances this leads to exoneration rather than just delayed execution?" The detective considered the question with appropriate seriousness. "Better than I initially thought. Within 24 hours of the stay, we've already uncovered significant problems with the original investigation. Detective Sullivan's case notes contain inconsistencies suggesting selective evidence gathering. The forensic re-examination of the crime scene photographs has identified several individuals in the gallery that day who were never interviewed, and most significantly, financial records show substantial payments from Calabresi-connected accounts to the gallery's security company immediately after your arrest. Hope, the emotion Nathan had most rigorously suppressed during his incarceration, began to stir despite his caution. He glanced down at Aspen, who had settled against his leg, but maintained physical contact as though making up for years of separation. How much of this was due to her? He asked, nodding toward the German shepherd. Everything, Margaret stated without hesitation. Without Aspen, we would never have found the recorder or journal. Even after finding them, we were blocked from official channels. The district attorney refused to forward our evidence to the governor. Detective Chen nodded agreement. We had to approach Governor Harrington directly during her public office hours. Even then, we were being diverted to intermediaries who might have buried the evidence. It was Aspen who convinced the governor to take our case seriously. Aspen convinced the governor. Nathan's skepticism was evident. She intervened directly, Margaret explained, a smile warming her expression at the memory. When Governor Harrington was about to leave without committing to action, Aspen physically blocked her path and made direct eye contact. The governor specifically mentioned afterward that the dog's certainty had influenced her decision. Nathan looked down at Aspen with renewed wonder, scratching behind her ears in the spot that had always been her favorite. You always were too smart for your own good. Aspen leaned into his touch, her eyes half closing in contentment. The governor granted us 30 minutes for this visit, Detective Chen said, checking her watch. I wanted to explain the investigation process and what you can expect going forward. For the next 20 minutes, she outlined the task force's approach, re-interviewing witnesses from the original case, analyzing financial connections between Calabresi's organization and the gallery, and preparing for possible testimony from Calabresi himself, who might consider providing information in exchange for considerations in his federal sentence. Nathan listened attentively, his analytical mind engaging with the investigative process while his hand maintained constant contact with Aspen. The dog remained pressed against his leg, occasionally looking up at his face as though reassuring herself of his continued presence. What can I do to help? Nathan asked when Detective Chen finished her explanation. I've spent 8 years reviewing every detail of that day, trying to understand what I missed or what might have been misinterpreted. Write everything down, she advised. Not just what you remember about the gallery and Catherine, but any interactions with Detective Sullivan during the investigation. Note any questions that seemed leading or topics he avoided. Document any witnesses who might have seen you entering or leaving the gallery through the service entrance. I've been doing exactly that since the warden told me about the stay, Nathan admitted. Old habits from architectural problem-solving externalize everything to see patterns more clearly. As their allotted time drew to a close, a guard appeared at the door with the universal signal that the visit was ending. The prospect of separation from Aspen, even temporarily, created visible tension in Nathan's posture. Margaret recognized his concern immediately. I've already applied for regular visitation with Aspen. The warden has provisionally approved weekly visits while the investigation proceeds. I don't know how to thank you, Nathan said, his voice subdued with emotion. Both of you. When everyone else accepted the story of my guilt, you kept looking for the truth. Thank Aspen, Detective Chen replied with unexpected gentleness. Her loyalty kept your connection alive when circumstances tried to sever it. That kind of bond, It reminds us why the truth matters beyond abstract principles of justice. As the moment of departure approached, Nathan knelt once more to embrace Aspen properly. The dog pressed her muzzle against his neck, her breath warm against his skin, in a gesture so familiar it momentarily transported him beyond the prison walls to memories of mornings in his small house, evenings in Riverview Park, nights with Aspen's reassuring weight at the foot of his bed. "I'll be back soon," he promised softly against her ear. "We're not done yet, you and I." Aspen's tail swept once in acknowledgement of the promise. When Margaret gently took her leash, the shepherd followed with evident reluctance but without resistance, looking back repeatedly as they moved toward the door. "Detective!" Nathan called as they prepared to exit. "One question I've never understood. Why did they take such an elaborate approach to framing me? Why not simply eliminate both of us if Catherine and I had discovered their operation?" "Detective," Jen paused, considering the question with professional assessment. Calabresi's organization operated by minimizing violence that attracted attention. A prominent gallery owner's murder required explanation. A scorned architect with financial motives provided the perfect narrative. Your conviction diverted attention from the real operation and allowed them to continue using the gallery for trafficking. "So my imprisonment actually protected their business," Nathan observed with bitter irony. "Yes, but it also preserved the evidence that's now exposing them," she countered. "If they had killed you too, there would have been no journal, no recorded threat, no connection leading back to them years later." This perspective, that the very circumstances of his unjust conviction had ultimately created the path to potential vindication, offered a framework for finding meaning in his years of confinement. The suffering hadn't been arbitrary. It had been an unintended consequence of choices that preserved the truth until it could finally emerge. As the door closed behind his visitors, Nathan returned to his seat at the metal table. The room felt simultaneously emptier without Aspen's presence and somehow fuller with the tangible hope that had entered with her. For the first time in 8 years, the future held possibilities beyond endurance. The investigation might require months with no guaranteed outcome. The institutional resistance to acknowledging wrongful conviction remained powerful. But something fundamental had shifted in Nathan's relationship to his circumstances. He was no longer merely surviving his confinement, but actively participating in a process that might ultimately restore his freedom and identity. And through it all, the most profound revelation was not the new evidence or the reopened investigation, but the knowledge that Aspen had maintained her connection to him across years and distance, remembering, waiting, and ultimately creating the bridge that connected his isolated existence back to the world beyond the prison walls. The investigation headquarters occupied a converted conference room in the State Justice Building's 3rd floor, neutral territory selected by Governor Harrington to ensure independence from both the prosecutor's office and the local police department. Maps and timelines covered the walls. Computer stations filled the central space, and a secured evidence room had been established in the adjoining office. Detective Alexandra Chen arrived at 6:30 a.m. for her 4th consecutive day with the Special Task Force, a travel mug of strong coffee, her only concession to the exhaustion accumulating from working 18-hour shifts. She was reviewing overnight developments when the task force director, former federal prosecutor William Hargrove, entered with a stack of file boxes. "Good morning, Detective. I've got the complete case files from Sullivan's archives," he announced, placing the boxes on the conference table. "Took a court order to get them. Apparently, Sullivan took the originals home after retirement. Claimed it was standard practice for lead detectives." Alex raised an eyebrow at this violation of protocol. "That's never been standard practice." "Exactly," Hargrove agreed, his lean face showing the first genuine smile she'd seen from the normally serious prosecutor. Makes you wonder what he wanted to keep from regular departmental review. For the past week, the task force had systematically deconstructed the case against Nathan Blackwood, examining each element with fresh perspective. Even without Sullivan's original notes, they had already identified multiple investigative failures, witnesses from the gallery who were never interviewed, surveillance footage from nearby businesses that was never collected, and forensic tests that were requested but apparently never performed. "Find anything interesting about our mysterious Detective Sullivan?" Hargrove asked, settling into the chair opposite her desk. Alex tapped her keyboard, bringing up Sullivan's personnel file. 27 years with Capital City Police. Solid, but unexceptional record until the Wells case. Filed for retirement 3 months after Blackwood's conviction, claiming health concerns. Purchased a vacation home in Arizona the same month. On a detective's pension. Hargrove looked skeptical. "That's where it gets interesting," Alex confirmed, turning her screen to show him a financial analysis. He sold his modest local home for $240,000 and purchased the Arizona property for $650,000. The difference supposedly came from family inheritance, but we can't find documentation of any such windfall. And coincidentally, Calabresi's organization moved over $1 million through shell companies during that same period, Hargrove noted, connecting the implications without needing them explicitly stated. The office door opened as 2 more task force members arrived, forensic accountant Priya Singh and investigator Carlos Mendez, both recruited from the FBI's white-collar crime division. They carried coffee and breakfast sandwiches, distributing them as a morning ritual that had quickly established itself among the team. "We've got something on the gallery's security system," Priya announced, unwrapping her sandwich while activating the conference room's projection screen. The company that installed the keypad lock Nathan noticed was Phoenix Security. Their client list included 3 other businesses later identified as Calabresi fronts. Carlos picked up the thread. More significantly, Phoenix Security received a $50,000 payment from Westlake Holdings, a known Calabresi shell company, 2 days after Catherine Wells' murder. "Paying for services rendered," Hargrove surmised grimly. "Any direct connection to Sullivan?" "Working on it," Carlos replied. "But we've established that Phoenix's owner, Michael Delaney, was Sullivan's former partner on the force before starting the security business. They maintained close social connections, according to both their social media and country club records." Alex felt the familiar investigative thrill as pieces aligned into coherent patterns. So Sullivan discovers his former partner's security company is connected to the gallery murder, and rather than pursuing that lead, he accelerates the case against Blackwood. While ensuring certain evidence never makes it into official channels, Hargrove added, turning toward the newly acquired case boxes, "Let's see what our detective thought important enough to take home with him." For the next 3 hours, the team methodically processed Sullivan's files, comparing them against the official case records. Discrepancies emerged immediately. Witness statements with different wording in the official version versus Sullivan's personal notes, forensic requests that appeared in his notes but never in the official file, and most significantly, a complete list of all gallery employees and service providers that had never been investigated. He had everything he needed to identify the Calabresi connection, Priya observed, examining the employee list. The gallery's art authenticator, Marcus Venti, had previously worked for galleries in Milan that were later implicated in Calabresi trafficking operations. While the team continued processing physical evidence, Alex's phone rang, a number she didn't recognize, with an Arizona area code. "Detective Chen," she answered cautiously. "You've been asking about James Sullivan," a woman's voice stated without preamble. I'm his daughter, Elaine Sullivan Brooks. We need to talk. Alex signaled to Hargrove, putting the call on speaker. I appreciate you reaching out, Ms. Sullivan Brooks. We're reviewing your father's cases as part of a routine assessment. The hollow laugh that responded carried evident bitterness. Let's not pretend, Detective. You're investigating whether my father buried evidence in the Blackwood case. The answer is yes, he did, and I can prove it. 30 minutes later, the call had been recorded, documented, and a secure video conference arranged for the following morning. According to his daughter, Sullivan had suffered a stroke 8 months earlier that had prompted soul-searching about his career. He had confessed to her that the Blackwood conviction had been engineered through selective evidence presentation, after Phoenix Security had approached him with a retirement arrangement. He didn't directly frame an innocent man, Elaine had explained, her voice tight with complicated emotion. He simply ensured that certain evidence pointing toward alternative suspects never made it into the official investigation. He told himself Blackwood was probably guilty anyway, and the money would secure my mother's future after his retirement. Does he have documentation of this arrangement? Hargrove had asked. Better. He kept recordings of his meetings with Michael Delaney as his own insurance policy. I have them, and I'm willing to testify about my father's statements. After the call ended, the team sat in stunned silence, absorbing the implications of this unexpected development. Sullivan's daughter's testimony wouldn't single-handedly exonerate Nathan, but combined with the mounting evidence of investigative misconduct and Calabrese connections, it created a compelling narrative of wrongful conviction. We need to move. Quickly, Hargrove decided, his prosecutor's instincts activating. If Sullivan's daughter is coming forward, others involved might be getting nervous. Delaney needs to be located and monitored before he disappears. As the team mobilized around this new priority, Alex stepped away to make a personal call to Margaret Peterson. Their weekly arrangement to bring Aspen to visit Nathan in prison was scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. How is he doing? Alexei asked after confirming the visit details. Better each time, Margaret reported. Physically, he's gaining strength. Mentally, he's fully engaged with helping the investigation, but emotionally... She paused, searching for the right words. It's like he's afraid to believe this might end well. He's been disappointed too many times. Tell him we're making significant progress, Alex replied, choosing her words carefully to balance hope with appropriate caution. We've identified specific misconduct in the original investigation and have a new witness coming forward. It's moving faster than I initially expected. I'll tell him, Margaret promised. And Alex? Aspen somehow knows when these calls are about Nathan. She's sitting right in front of me, completely focused on the phone. Alex smiled at the image. That doesn't surprise me anymore. That dog understands more than most humans I work with. After ending the call, Alex returned to find Hargrove reviewing security footage from nearby businesses on the day of Catherine's murder. Material that Sullivan had collected, but never entered into evidence. Look at this, he indicated, freezing a frame that showed the alley behind the gallery. The timestamp read 3:05 p.m., just after the estimated time of Catherine's murder, and notably after Nathan had claimed to exit through the service entrance. The grainy image showed a man exiting the gallery's rear door. Though not perfectly clear, his build and clothing matched security personnel from Phoenix, rather than Nathan's more slender frame and business attire. Sullivan had this the entire time, Alex realized, anger and professional outrage mingling in her voice. This directly supports Blackwood's account of leaving before the murder and contradicts the prosecution's timeline. Withholding exculpatory evidence is grounds for immediate dismissal of charges, Hargrove confirmed, his legal mind already formulating the necessary motions. Combined with Sullivan's daughter's testimony and the Calabrese connections, we're approaching the threshold for declaring actual innocence rather than just procedural misconduct. As they continued reviewing the suppressed footage, another team member burst into the room. "We've got something from the forensics re-examination," announced Dr. Sarah Williams, the medical examiner assigned to the task force. The original autopsy report on Catherine Wells didn't match the actual autopsy photographs. She spread a series of images across the conference table. "Look at the wound patterns. The official report describes a single entry wound with significant force behind it, consistent with the prosecution's theory that Blackwood stabbed her in anger. But the actual photographs show two distinct entry points with surgical precision and minimal surrounding tissue damage." "Meaning what?" Alex asked, struggling to interpret the medical details. "Meaning this wasn't a crime of passion or opportunity," Dr. Williams explained. "This was an execution by someone with training. The letter opener was used with the precision of a scalpel, not grabbed in anger by an architect with no violent history." The professional significance wasn't lost on anyone in the room. This revelation directly contradicted the prosecution's entire theory of the case, suggesting not only that Nathan was innocent, but that the murder had been committed by someone with specialized skills. "Phoenix Security employed multiple former military personnel," Carlos noted, consulting his research, "including 2 with Special Forces training." Hargrove surveyed the accumulated evidence with the practiced eye of a prosecutor assessing a case's strength. "We have enough to approach the district attorney's office formally. The combination of withheld exculpatory evidence, investigative misconduct, forensic inconsistencies, and direct connections to Calabrese's organization constitutes grounds for immediate motion to vacate Blackwood's conviction." "Lawrence won't cooperate willingly," Alex cautioned, remembering the district attorney's resistance to even forwarding their initial evidence to the governor. His office prosecuted the original case and has defended it through 8 years of appeals. "That's why we're not giving him a choice," Hargrove replied with grim determination. "Governor Harrington has authorized us to take our findings directly to Judge Eliza Montgomery in the state Supreme Court if necessary. Lawrence can participate in acknowledging the error, or he can watch from the sidelines as the court overturns one of his office's highest-profile convictions." The team worked through the night, compiling their findings into a comprehensive report with supporting evidence. By morning, they had assembled what amounted to an irrefutable case for Nathan's innocence. Not merely procedural errors, but affirmative evidence pointing to an entirely different perpetrator and motive. As dawn broke over the city, Alex stepped outside the Justice Building to clear her mind after the intensive session. The morning air carried the promise of early spring, with delicate buds appearing on trees lining the government complex. After 16 straight hours of work, her body craved rest, but her mind remained energized by the momentum of justice finally moving in the right direction. Her phone chimed with a text from Margaret. "Aspen hasn't slept all night. Keeps going. To the door, then to the window, then back to the door. Something's different today." The message brought an involuntary smile to Alex's exhausted face. Even miles away, with no possible knowledge of the task force's breakthrough, Nathan's dog somehow sensed the shift in circumstances. "Tell her she's right," Alex texted back. "Today is different. We're bringing the evidence to court this morning. It's finally happening." As she prepared to return inside for the final preparations, Alex reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had led to this moment. If Margaret hadn't maintained her connection to Nathan through Mia's memory, if Aspen hadn't preserved and then located the crucial evidence, if they hadn't managed to reach Governor Harrington directly against institutional resistance, any broken link would have resulted in an innocent man's execution. The systemic failures that had convicted Nathan was sobering reminders of justice's imperfections, yet the path to potential exoneration revealed something equally important, that determination, loyalty, and commitment to truth could sometimes overcome even the most entrenched institutional mistakes. With this thought providing renewed purpose, Alex rejoined the task force to finalize their court presentation. Within hours, they would formally initiate the legal process to dismantle a conviction that had withstood 8 years of challenges. The outcome wasn't guaranteed, but for the first time since discovering Nathan's recorded evidence, Alex allowed herself to envision not just preventing his execution, but securing his complete freedom. The final step in this extraordinary journey now lay with the courts, the same system that had condemned Nathan based on incomplete evidence and questionable investigation. The irony wasn't lost on anyone involved, but the opportunity for institutional redemption offered its own form of justice. The system that had failed him now had the chance to acknowledge its error and begin making amends for 8 years of wrongful imprisonment. As they gathered their materials and prepared to depart for the courthouse, Hargrove addressed the assembled team with rare emotion, breaking through his professional demeanor. "What we do today matters beyond this single case," he told them. "We're not just correcting an injustice against one man. We're demonstrating that the system can recognize its mistakes and have the courage to correct them, even when doing so requires confronting uncomfortable truths about institutional failures. Remember that purpose as we move forward." With these words establishing their mission, the team departed for court, carrying with them not just evidence of Nathan's innocence, but the possibility of redemption for a justice system that had faltered, but not failed completely in its fundamental purpose. The William J. Peterson State Courthouse projected authority through its imposing neoclassical architecture. 6 massive columns framing the entrance, marble steps rising to heavy bronze. Doors and the words, "Equal justice under law," chiseled into the stone lintel above. For most visitors, the building's grandeur inspired confidence in the legal system's solemnity and purpose. For Nathan Blackwood, transported from Lakeside Prison in the pre-dawn hours, the courthouse represented something more complex. The institution that had condemned him now reconsidering its judgment. Seated in a small conference room adjacent to courtroom 3, Nathan adjusted the unfamiliar weight of a suit provided for this appearance. After 8 years in prison attire, the crisp white shirt and navy jacket felt simultaneously foreign and familiar, a tactile reminder of his former life and perhaps a tentative bridge to his future. "The hearing will begin at 9 a.m., his attorney explained, organizing documents with practiced efficiency. Melissa Ortega had been appointed by the court to represent Nathan after his public defender withdrew, citing conflict of interest once evidence of investigative misconduct emerged. Unlike Marcus Green, whose inexperience had contributed to Nathan's original conviction, Ortega brought 20 years of experience in criminal defense and overturned convictions to his case. "The format is somewhat unusual," she continued. "Normally, we would file a habeas petition based on new evidence and wait months for consideration. Governor Harrington's direct intervention has accelerated the process considerably." "What should I expect?" Nathan asked, his voice carrying the deliberate control of someone accustomed to managing hope precisely to prevent disappointment. "Judge Montgomery will hear presentations from both the Special Task Force and the District Attorney's Office. You won't need to testify today. This hearing focuses on the investigative findings rather than your direct account." She hesitated, before adding, "Lawrence's office has filed opposition to the motion for immediate release, claiming the new evidence deserves consideration but doesn't conclusively establish innocence." Nathan absorbed this with resignation rather than surprise. 8 years of fighting my conviction has taught me that institutional momentum doesn't reverse easily. True, Ortega acknowledged, but this situation is different. The evidence assembled by the task force isn't just suggestive. It's compelling enough that several prosecutors in Lawrence's own office have privately expressed concerns about defending the conviction. Before Nathan could respond, the door opened to admit William Hargrove and Detective Alexandra Chen. Both carried themselves with the focused determination of people prepared for significant confrontation. "Mr. Blackwood," Hargrove greeted him with formal courtesy, "I wanted to brief you personally before the hearing begins. The task force has compiled evidence that not only undermines your conviction, but affirmatively points toward alternative perpetrators connected to Vincent Calabresi's organization. We have documentation of Detective Sullivan's misconduct, testimony from his daughter about his confession, and forensic evidence contradicting the prosecution's theory of the murder," Detective Chen elaborated. "Additionally, we've established financial connections between Phoenix Security and Calabresi's shell companies, with payments coinciding with Catherine Wells' murder." Nathan listened with the careful attention he had once given to complex architectural specifications, noting both what they said and what remained implied. "You believe this will be sufficient to vacate my conviction today?" Hargrove's expression reflected measured confidence. "Judge Montgomery has reviewed our preliminary filings and scheduled this emergency hearing rather than following standard procedural timelines. That suggests she recognizes the significance of our findings. However," he continued with appropriate caution, "Lawrence's office will argue that further investigation is warranted before full exoneration. They'll likely concede procedural misconduct while attempting to preserve some possibility of your involvement." "Politics," Nathan observed, with the weary insight of someone who had witnessed the system's self-protective instincts firsthand. "Admitting complete error would raise too many questions about other convictions." "Precisely," Hargrove confirmed, "but Judge Montgomery has a reputation for prioritizing justice over institutional convenience. Her willingness to hold this hearing on expedited basis suggests she's prepared to make difficult decisions, regardless of political consequences." A court officer appeared at the door. "They're ready for you in courtroom 3. The main courtroom presented a stark contrast to the institutional starkness of prison spaces Nathan had grown accustomed to. Rich wooden paneling lined the walls. The state seal hung prominently behind the judge's bench, and the public gallery provided seating for media representatives and legal observers who had gathered for the unusual hearing. As Nathan entered, alongside his attorney, he scanned the gallery automatically, seeking familiar faces. His breath caught when he spotted Margaret Peterson seated in the front row. Though prison regulations prevented Aspen from attending, Margaret's presence provided tangible connection to his most faithful companion. Judge Eliza Montgomery entered from her chambers, her reputation for incisive legal analysis visible in her sharp gaze as she surveyed the assembled parties. At 67, she had presided over the state's most consequential cases for nearly 2 decades, earning respect from both prosecution and defense for her unwavering commitment to procedural integrity. This court is convened to consider the motion to vacate the conviction of Nathan Blackwood in the matter of State v. Blackwood, she announced, her voice carrying natural authority. Given the extraordinary circumstances and time-sensitive nature of the evidence presented, I've agreed to hear this matter directly rather than through standard procedural channels. Her attention shifted to the prosecution table. Mr. Lawrence, as I understand it, your office has filed opposition to immediate vacation of the conviction while acknowledging investigative irregularities. Please state your position for the record. District Attorney Robert Lawrence rose with the practiced confidence of a career prosecutor. His silver hair and tailored suit projected establishment authority, his expression suggesting reasonableness rather than obstruction. Your Honor, the state acknowledges that concerning evidence of investigative irregularities has emerged regarding Detective Sullivan's handling of certain aspects of the Wells murder investigation. We do not oppose review of these matters and have cooperated fully with the Governor's task force. He paused for effect before continuing. However, we maintain that procedural errors, while serious, do not automatically establish the defendant's innocence. The physical evidence placing Mr. Blackwood at the scene remains undisputed. His fingerprints were found on the murder weapon, and the financial motive established at trial has not been conclusively refuted. Judge Montgomery's expression revealed nothing of her assessment. Mr. Hargrove, please present the task force's findings. For the next 45 minutes, Hargrove methodically presented evidence that systematically dismantled the case against Nathan. He displayed the suppressed security footage showing a Phoenix security employee exiting the gallery's rear door. During the critical time window, he presented the forensic reanalysis demonstrating the murder weapon had been used with precision, inconsistent with the prosecution's theory of an angry impulse killing. Most damaging to the state's position was the sworn statement from Elaine Sullivan Brooks, participating via secure video conference, who recounted her father's deathbed confession about burying evidence at Phoenix Security's request in exchange for financial consideration upon retirement. Your Honor, Hargrove concluded, the evidence establishes not merely procedural errors, but deliberate misconduct designed to secure Mr. Blackwood's conviction while diverting attention from Calabresi's criminal enterprise operating through the gallery. This represents one of the most egregious miscarriages of justice in our state's history. Lawrence rose for rebuttal, his confident demeanor notably diminished by the task force's presentation. While these findings certainly justify reopening the investigation, they don't conclusively establish Mr. Blackwood's non-involvement. His presence at the scene remains undisputed. His presence at the gallery before the murder remains undisputed. Judge Montgomery interrupted, her first departure from judicial neutrality. The suppressed security footage directly supports his account of leaving before the murder occurred. Isn't that correct, Mr. Lawrence? The footage is somewhat unclear, Your Honor, Lawrence attempted. I've reviewed it personally, Judge Montgomery stated flatly. It clearly shows someone matching the Phoenix security employee's description, not Mr. Blackwood, exiting at the time in question. This directly contradicts your office's theory of the case and timeline presented at trial. As Lawrence struggled to reframe his argument, Judge Montgomery turned her attention to Nathan's attorney. Ms. Ortega, what remedy does your client seek from this court today? Melissa Ortega rose with composed determination. Your Honor, given the overwhelming evidence of innocence combined with documented prosecutorial and investigative misconduct, we request immediate vacation of Mr. Blackwood's conviction, dismissal of all charges with prejudice, and his immediate release from custody. Judge Montgomery considered this request with deliberate thoroughness, her gaze moving between the assembled attorneys before finally settling on Nathan himself. Something in her expression shifted subtly, not unprofessional sympathy, but human recognition of the gravity of the decision before her. I have presided over thousands of criminal proceedings during my judicial career, she began, her voice carrying the weight of accumulated experience. The foundation of our criminal justice system rests upon two essential principles: procedural integrity and the paramount importance of avoiding punishment of the innocent, even at the risk of failing to punish the guilty. She closed the file before her with deliberate precision. The evidence presented today demonstrates catastrophic failure on both fronts. Detective Sullivan's deliberate suppression of exculpatory evidence alone would justify vacating this conviction. combined with the forensic inconsistencies, witness testimony regarding confession and financial connections to Calabresi's organization, the conclusion becomes inescapable. The courtroom held its collective breath as Judge Montgomery delivered her decision. This court hereby vacates the conviction of Nathan Blackwood in the murder of Catherine Wells, dismisses all charges with prejudice, and orders his immediate release from custody. Furthermore, I am initiating judicial review of Detective Sullivan's other major cases and referring this matter to the federal authorities for potential prosecution of those involved in the deliberate framing of an innocent man. She turned directly to Nathan, addressing him not as defendant, but as victim of systemic failure. Mr. Blackwood, no judicial pronouncement can restore the 8 years taken from you through this miscarriage of justice. The state's civil obligations to you will be addressed in subsequent proceedings. You are free to leave this courthouse today as an innocent man fully exonerated of all charges. With a decisive strike of her gavel, Judge Montgomery closed the proceedings and rose to exit the courtroom. The assembled observers erupted in murmured conversation as the impact of her unequivocal ruling registered throughout the room. Nathan sat momentarily immobilized, the judge's words still resonating in his consciousness. Freedom, not provisional, not pending further investigation, but immediate and complete. Exoneration, not merely procedural victory, but affirmative declaration of innocence. After 8 years of fighting against a system determined to maintain his guilt, the sudden and complete reversal left him temporarily unable to process its implications. Beside him, Melissa Ortega squeezed his shoulder gently. "It's over, Nathan. You're free." As the reality gradually penetrated his carefully maintained emotional barriers, Nathan became aware of Margaret approaching from the gallery, her face alight with joy and relief. Behind her came Detective Chen and the task force members, their professional composure maintained but satisfaction evident in their expressions. "Aspen is waiting outside," Margaret told him, her voice breaking slightly with emotion. "She's been pacing the courthouse steps since dawn, somehow knowing today was significant." This image, his faithful companion waiting with unwavering certainty for his emergence, finally breached Nathan's protective detachment. The full weight of what had just occurred washed over him in a wave of overwhelming emotion. 8 years of suppressed hope, calibrated expectations, and rigorous self-control gave way to the simple, profound reality. He was innocent, declared so by the same system that had condemned him, and he was going home. As court officers processed the paperwork for his release, Nathan found himself surrounded by the improbable alliance that had secured his freedom. A detective who questioned comfortable certainties, a special prosecutor who prioritized truth over conviction records, a woman who had honored her commitment to both her niece and his dog, and throughout it all, Aspen, whose extraordinary loyalty had preserved crucial evidence until the world was ready to recognize its significance. "How do you begin to thank people for saving your life?" Nathan asked, the question directed to everyone and no one in particular. "By living it fully," Detective Chen answered simply. "The best response to injustice isn't bitterness, but reclaiming what was taken with renewed appreciation." Within 30 minutes, the final documents were processed, the last procedural requirements satisfied. Nathan walked toward the courthouse's bronze doors, each step carrying him closer to a freedom he had forced himself to stop imagining years earlier. The architectural symbolism of thresholds, transitions between defined spaces that mark fundamental changes in circumstance, had never felt more personally significant than in this moment of crossing from captivity to liberty. As the doors opened before him, spring sunlight momentarily blinded him after the courthouse's subdued lighting, and then, Through that temporary disorientation came the sound he had carried in memory through 8 years of separation. Aspen's distinctive bark, not of warning or play, but of recognition and joy. Nathan descended the marble steps as Aspen bounded up to meet him, their reunion now unrestricted by institutional barriers or time limitations. In the space between them lay 8 years of separate journeys, yet in the moment of reconnection, those years seemed to compress into insignificance against the enduring bond that had ultimately secured his freedom. As Nathan knelt to embrace his faithful companion, the courthouse behind him and an uncertain but limitless future ahead, he recognized that the path to rebuilding his life would be neither simple nor immediate. Yet the foundation for that rebuilding existed in this moment of reunion, in the loyalty that had transcended separation, the truth that had eventually overcome deception, and the justice that, however delayed, had finally awakened to correct its profound error. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.